Yeah, I got my first death threat in my early 20s, and my most recent death threat just last year. The hate that journalists get is astounding. And when you add Black womanhood on top of that, in every intersection that comes on top of that, it gets harder and heavier.
Good evening. I'm Susan Spurlock, Executive Director of Fort Hall Forum at Suffolk University, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's program, Deliberate and Unafraid, Examining the Plight of the Black Woman Cultural Critic, in which we welcome back to the Fort Hall Forum stage Jeneé Osterheldt of the Boston Globe and Candace McDuffie from The Root, and welcome Clarissa Brooks from Reckon South and Erica Campbell from NME. These women are deliberate and unafraid. They are fierce and they are fiercely talented. I'd like to recognize GBH Forum Network, this evening's co-host and producer, and the Lowell Institute, whose generous funding makes programs like this possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce this evening's moderator, Jeneé Osterheldt, award-winning Boston Globe cultural columnist and creator of A Beautiful Resistance, the Globe's multimedia project, which highlights stories of joy, self-expression, connection, and community for Black Americans and other people of color in the Boston area. And in her columns, Jeneé covers identity and social justice through the lens of culture and the arts. She centers Black lives and the lives of people of color. Sometimes this means writing about Beyonce and Black womanhood, or unpacking the importance of public art and representation. Sometimes it means taking systemic racism, sexism, and oppression to task. It always means Black Lives Matter. Jeneé was a 2017 Nieman Fellow at Harvard University, and she joined the Boston Globe in 2018. Jeneé, I'm going to toss it to you.
Thank you so much, Susan, for such a kind and generous introduction. I am just so lucky to be here with my esteemed colleagues, author of 50 Best Rappers and senior writer at The Root, Candace McDuffie, who literally just creates space everywhere she goes. Erica Campbell, news editor of NME, who also has an extensive history in cultural criticism. Journalist Clarissa Brooks, who is an audience editor at Reckon South and identity writer at Mike.com. All of us have in common is we represent for the culture, and we know that to love us is also to be able to critique and expound upon the arts that are made for us and often by us. I want to start this conversation with just centering us in joy. As Susan said, I'm the creator of A Beautiful Resistance, and that is a place where we push Black joy and dreams. So I want to start with Clarissa and ask you, what is giving you joy today?
Such a great question. I think on a day-to-day basis, I just have a deep love for hip hop and R&B and like Black cultural production. So was listening to the last ESCG album, really love it. And I think in the day-to-day, I think Black TikTok is just the funniest thing in the world. So that's normally how I decompress at the end of the day.
Erica?
Yeah, so today I feel like being able to have this conversation, even just the pre-conversation, and commiserate and have other people kind of see situations from your point of view and talk about culture that way, that is bringing me a lot of joy today. And some simple things. I went to Trader Joe's yesterday. I got some really good groceries and I cooked myself some nice breakfast, and it brought me a lot of joy this morning. So I'm going to add that to my list as well.
Man, you're making me wish I had Trader Joe's cookie butter right now.
So good.
I did a good job at kicking that. The incomparable Candace McDuffie.
Today I saw that Diddy is hosting the Billboard Music Awards on Sunday. So I reached out to my editor and I was like, can I just not write news stories today and just write a Diddy slideshow about his career? And she's like, that's a great idea, say less. Okay. So blasting Diddy, Puff Daddy and the Family at work. All my coworkers heard it. I didn't care. And it brought me immense joy.
Kendrick Lamar's album is coming out at midnight, I guess. So that is my joy. That video that Kendrick dropped is my joy. And Danielle Smith, who is a OG entertainment writer, author, and just honestly, if I'm being very honest, she and Dream Hampton are the reason why I even exist in journalism. And her book is out, Shine Bright, an ode to Black women singers. So that is also giving me much, much joy. I think because we are talking about cultural criticism and being Black women who cover music and the arts, I would love to hear how everybody got into the business. Erica?
Yeah. So I got into music journalism accidentally. I wanted to go to a show. My sisters had a music magazine when they were in college, and I knew that they had been on like the red carpet for the BET Awards. And in my head, because I didn't know that it was difficult, I thought, oh, all you do is reach out to places. Somebody gives you a press pass. Boom, you write about music. So I made a website, covered this festival, and it kind of took off from there. And I realized while I was writing in tech that I was passionate about writing about music. So I started doing that part-time until I, decided this is what lights me up. This is what I want to pursue. And I just made a leap, a very risky leap into writing about music full-time, doing freelance until I was able to, actually use my experience to apply for positions. And then have people actually accept me and bring me onto their teams. So that's the shorter version of it, but really it was just kind of chasing, wanting to write about music and wanting to interview artists.
Candace?
My career started in 2006. I was doing an internship in New York City through Pace University, and I couldn't afford to go to concerts. And I was like, I'm an English major. I'll just write about it, get some free CDs, it'll be fine. So I pursued a master's degree in education. I was a preschool teacher for 12 years, while just writing on the side and doing it freelance. And now I'm full-time writing for the first time in my career. So it just started like Erica, a love of music, the initiative, as Black women often take, to just do something they're really passionate about and just go for it.
Where are you at, Clarissa?
My goodness. It's also shocking that this is Candace's and I's first time writing full time. I feel like we've both been freelancing on the side for most of our careers.
For a while.
Very similarly, I've also just been an opinionated Black girl since high school. And at some point was like, I should get paid for what I write. And more specifically, like I just could not afford internships at publications that weren't paying. Like I just couldn't do it. And freelancing was the quickest way where you didn't need too many credentials and you could just kind of go to something or have an opinion and write about it. So that's how I got into it. And I started at Dead End Hip Hop on their blog site writing about music.
Clarissa, I think you just started our new podcast that you can tune in and catch us on Twitter Spaces or Instagram Live once a week, Opinionated Black Girls.
Yeah, that's the biggest threat in my life. I just felt the way and just didn't give up on feeling that way.
I am a little older, so I've been doing this for 20 years. And
But Jeneé, you look 25, so that's...
I'm from the land of Pharrell, so, there really is something in the water. in Virginia. So he didn't lie about that. I started, Danielle and Dreamhampton really inspired me as a kid. I was obsessed with both of them. I come from the era of Source Magazine and Vibe and Double XL. And I just really, really wanted, Dream used to write the most amazing pieces for Village Voice. She's still amazing, but her pieces for Village Voice were so groundbreaking to me. And she wrote exactly how we speak. And I think Greg Tate is amazing, and rest in peace, Greg Tate. Dreamhampton was my Greg Tate. She was like my North Star, and then Danielle Smith became my North Star too. So the first 10 years of my career were being a music critic and covering hip hop, R&B, and occasionally pop. I remember our music critic making me go to the Justin Timberlake NSYNC, the last hurrah before, as Justin was going solo, and Avril Lavigne. So I had to do that as well. And then, of course, it dabbled into food criticism and arts criticism. And then Trayvon was murdered and everything about me changed. And that's kind of when I shifted more into social justice. But I think it's a natural evolution, because hip hop is so much about resistance and about speaking our truth. So anyways, that's how I am able to be in community and be invited to Candace's tables that she builds. I really, the title of this conversation is Deliberate and Unafraid. And I really think we don't talk enough about the intention in which Black women move, and how nothing we do is without intention. Can you talk about what it means to be deliberate when you are pitching stories, when you're writing a book, when you're reviewing a concert, like how important intention is? Anybody can hop in.
I can kick us off because I think something pops in my head. I think the importance of intention feels critical to it. And I also feel like I recently did a short profile on Saucy Santana for Rolling Stone. And the main impetus of that was like, me and my friends were always talking about Saucy Santana, and I was not seeing him get covered by major legacy publications. And that's how a lot of the things I write is like, me and my friends are listening to an artist, me and the people that I care about care deeply about something, and it's not being covered because it's not seen as serious, or it's not seen as like, whatever white heteronormative reason. And then the piece came out and it got such great feedback because so many people are listening to Saucy. He just got a record deal. So I think it's always been centered in what are my folks listening to, and how can I make sure folks understand that our attention should actually be on this.
I'll hop in on that point as well. I think for me, because I cover rock music, one of the things growing up that I didn't think about becoming a music journalist was because I didn't see anybody that looked like me doing it. So when I have these days where I'm like bogged down, or I'm like, I don't know about this, I don't know if I want to keep doing this, I think about the smaller version of me who didn't have me as an example of like, not just you can cover rock music, but you can do whatever you want. Like as a young Black woman, you could decide what you want your career to be and pursue that. So when I, do talks, or when I write an article and I see young Black women reacting to it, that for me is like that's it. Just even if it's like, if the topic doesn't really center around race, or if it's just about like a song that I thought was worth talking about, just so that they know, like, if she's doing this, that means I have space to do this. Like that, I kind of pull myself back to that intention when I lose focus on like, why am I doing this? Why is this important?
I think for me, I was very unintentional when I first started writing about music. I didn't want to talk about Blackness, didn't want to talk about my identity because I didn't want that to taint in my mind the piece that I was writing. In 2016, Kendrick Lamar became the most Grammy-nominated artist ever, like since Michael Jackson. And I was like, this is a huge deal for a Black man, for a Black rapper to be honored by this institution that's historically racist. And then I started that track, and I was like, okay, like I think I could write about race and culture and how they intersect. And that was the same year that Trump got elected. And then I was like, here we go. You know, I have to write about Black women. I have to write about Black people because I am one. I have to elevate our experiences because they're important. And we're still being killed and murdered by the police. We're still fighting for our rights. We're still begging to be seen as human in 2022. So even though it becomes hard, and I do get hate mail and harassed online and I deal with all of that, I always know that in my soul, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do when it comes to uplifting my people. And I didn't really realize that until a few years ago.
Now it's very, well, since you brought up, I was gonna save that part for a little down the ways, but since you did bring up the how hard it gets, the hate mail and things. Yeah, I got my first death threat in my early 20s and my most recent death threat just last year. The hate that journalists get is astounding. And when you add Black womanhood on top of that, in every intersection that comes on top of that, it gets harder and heavier. And people sometimes will hate us just for being who we are and showing up to the table, to the platforms that they read. And then there's the hate that comes from within the community as well, when you have an opinion they don't agree on. We saw what happened to Candace when she wrote about Beyonce. I have been dragged a multitude of times for not being perceived as Black enough to talk about Black things. There's like two washes of hate that happen. Can you all talk a little bit about how you grapple with that and how you push through? Because there's this idea that we are fearless and we are not without fear. I think being unafraid is actually wrestling with that fear and getting up every day and still walking in your purpose. Sharon Hidden asked, when did we realize we were fearless? So I want to talk a little bit about what it means to actually wrestle with that fear and deal with this type of hate, both from within and without the community. Candace, you want to?
I think for me, the biggest resource I've had in my entire career is Black women. Beehive coming for me crazy. I call up Erica, like, Erica, what's happening? What's going on? What do I do? You know what I mean? Like, Jeneé, I called you with the root interview process, like what's happening, what's going on? We talk for hours about so many things. And having that community of other Black women journalists specifically has given me strength, has given me hope, it's given me perspective. And I'm so, so grateful for it. And I feel like that is my biggest, my resource, are you guys, so thank you.
Yeah, I think my short answer is that I don't handle it very well a lot of the times. It could be an innocuous email and I'll read it and I'll just be like, I don't care about that. And like 2 hours later, I'm sitting around and it just comes back up and I realize like, okay, I need to say something to somebody about it. I need to kind of talk it through. Candace is always a great resource because we like can kind of make light of these things and then remember who we are and like why we're doing this, while, we kind of go back and forth of like laughing at how ridiculous it is and going back into the space of like, who you are, don't let people tell you who you are at the same time. So it's good to have that balance. But yeah, I think that you just, people on the internet don't remember that you're human. So you have to kind of take that as like your job to remind yourself that you're human and you're allowed to be upset. And that even if it's just a comment, that it's okay to kind of sit with that feeling before going to the next thing and maybe give yourself a break. But I agree with Candace. I think being in a community with people that are also experiencing that, so that you can kind of have people to talk to about it that understand where you're coming from, is the best way to handle it. Because I think people that are trying to attack you in that way, they kind of want you to feel alone and alienated, and like what they say matters. So having somebody else come to you and be like, this person doesn't know you, they know nothing about you, you're doing great, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I think that I think very similar to y'all. I got my first round of like death and assault threats, probably 2019. And very similarly have like faced harassment in different ways since then. I think one, being a kid that grew up on Tumblr, oversharing on the internet is like so critical to how I just how I've been taught to interact with the internet. So I think primarily, and I try to tell a lot of young journalists, like, set your boundaries online, you know, like, you don't gotta be best friends with everybody. You don't have to tell all your business. One, because, and I think this was also a really important part for me, was understanding that the algorithms of the internet predicate on the harassment of Black women and femmes. So reading Moya Bailey's work, reading Glitch Feminism, like reading Gia Tolentino's work, like those things made me understand why are all the Black women journalists I follow being harassed. It gave me information about how like, oh, these platforms are set up for us to be targeted and harassed. And that gave me some space from it. And that gave me a bit more understanding about why people act the way they do, why shame is so important online, why binaries of good and bad are so important online, and how I can distance myself, you know, I can center myself in my work and not on being liked as much, because I know that these places are not meant for me to thrive or even survive in. So I try to really express that to other young journalists, is to like focus on the work you want to do, because the internet, you could be on the chopping blocks tomorrow, because it is that fast. So yeah, I try to just keep that in mind when I'm going through things and get offline, touch some grass as much as I can.
Clarissa, can you drop those book titles for the audience and for everyone in the chat outside of the panelists? We have a question, and I think it's actually a really good one. Can you describe what a culture critic music writer does? I've heard this question so many times over the last 20 years. And I think, you know, recently we've seen, you know, Viola Davis kind of was like, oh, you know, the criticism serves no purpose. And, you know, for her, it doesn't, because she knows what she knows her work, she knows her value, but I think for the audience, it does. So I think that there's one of those two things can be true at once. Can you talk a little bit about what it is to be a culture critic, a music critic, a writer? Clarissa, you want to go since you're right here?
Cool. I can. So for me and my understanding of cultural criticism, it's always been a lane of interpreting art and culture. So specifically, those are the folks that are ingesting and absorbing art and culture in a very specific way, to where we have a bird's eye view of the industry, and we're consuming things on a regular basis. So that feels a little different than just like somebody who's doing a hot take or folks who are social media personalities. We're regularly consuming things. We have to know just a broader range of history when it comes to artists. So like if somebody's asking me to write about Kendrick, I'm spending weeks upon weeks studying and going through all of his content, singles, everything, in a very different way than just somebody who is interacting with his work kind of sparingly.
I think for me, a lot of it, some of it comes down to being a conduit between like the art and the people consuming it, and being like that filter that's like, okay, this is using my, like Clarissa said, using what I know and like the actual process I went through to educate myself about this person or about their music, explaining it to people and kind of contextualizing it in that way. But I also think a part of it is like holding people in power kind of to the fire and bringing up things and questioning things so that people that are on the other side of it that don't have that responsibility of talking about art and picking it apart can kind of start to ask questions as well. I think sometimes it might feel like as the cultural critic, you have to have all the answers, but I think even looking at art and just coming up with more questions so that other people can look at it in a different perspective has been really rewarding for me as well.
I saw your answer in the chat, Jeneé, about it just contextualizing works and drawing lines for people. I try to do that with my work. I try to contextualize what's going on from a historical perspective, specifically with Black people, and try to educate readers too. Like, this is, someone says something racist. You go, oh, it's not racist, and they have to sit here and tell you why it's racist. You know, the historical background of this phrase or these actions or this system, because I feel like that is so important to making a case and make sure your case stand tall when you educate the readers. And I think it's also about, you know, not being afraid to share an opinion. You know, it's hard because a lot of cultural critics they're basically PR people. They don't want to say they don't like something because they don't want to be harassed, right? They don't want to be doxxed. But I feel like the best critics are the ones who have an opinion and are willing to share it with facts and, you know, and stand on it.
Yeah, so much of my work has to do with contextualizing and drawing those through lines between what came before, what's happening now, and what it means for the future. That's kind of like the ethos of how I look at things. And to me, almost all art, be it music, film, TV, creative works in general, I think are such strong tools of the revolution and conversations around social justice. So that's how I use it in my work. Speaking to what it means, you know, I'm thinking about what Erica said about covering rock and being a Black girl. And for all of us, you know, we're in a very white industry, no matter what we cover. We're in, you know, I write very, very Blackity Black things, but I am in a very white you know, newsroom and white space, and I always have been. Sometimes I get jealous when I think about the 80s, which is weird because it was a terrible time, but it was also, when I think about the things that made me want to get in this business, when I think about Source and Vibe and XXL and Essence and there was other ones too that I just am not, I feel like there was one that was like rap would have, no, word up, that had like exclamation marks. But I mean, but there was so many media outlets in which the editors were Black and the publishers are Black. And for many of us, Candace currently being the exception, but most of Candace's career has been writing for all mainstream publications that are not specifically for Black folks. And that means writing very Black things sometimes, or even things that aren't Black, but you're writing with the Black gaze and your editor is white. And, or the person you're pitching to is white. And there's a thing that happens even with the most well-intentioned white person sometimes where you are put in the position of having to explain your culture or your community in a way that a white writer never would. Can you all talk about what that means and what it has meant in your career to carry that extra? Because that's something white journalists, especially white cis journalists, do not have to really deal with, that extra sometimes fight and hurdle that you have to jump.
Yeah.
Erica? Oh, Clarissa, were you already going? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and can go to Erica after. Yeah, I think that is like, to this day, still the thing I least enjoy is getting an edit back and like somebody being like, explain this. And I'm like, I feel like I did. I feel like I explained it. I feel like it'll make sense to the people it needs to make sense for. It's still a constant struggle, especially when it comes to very Black things. I'm thinking specifically about like the coverage of Meghan by blogs versus like legacy publications, I still haven't seen a sweet spot that really speaks to the violence that she's faced. And it's been painful to see her have to reiterate over and over again that she was harmed and it not being covered in the media. Very similar with like even with like the recent video of like Jack Harlow not knowing Brandy, like that is something that when you care about Black music, you know who Brandy is, right? And a white editor would see that as a really quick news topic. But for myself, I see it as this is an artist that does not respect Black music in a way to know his stuff. Because if he did, he would know who Brandy is, right? If he's a fan of Drake, he would know that Drake is a fan of Aaliyah. And we don't have Aaliyah without Brandy. We don't have that legacy of R&B without Brandy being involved. And those are very specific things that I don't want to explain, but in the industry we're in, it comes with it. And yeah, it's a tough thing. I still struggle with it. And I try my best to build relationship with Black editors so that I can just pitch to those people who get it. So I have to do a little less explaining.
Yeah, I think right after George Floyd was murdered, there was like this big push to commission more Black writers, but there was also nobody was prepared for what that meant. So there was a lot of like, here, I'm going to commission you to write this story, but I don't understand your purview whatsoever. And I'd like for you to write about this issue. So that was, I will say that it was not only painful because of some of the topics we were covering, but also having to like explain to someone why something is not okay that seems to you objectively to be obviously not okay. Like some of the articles I was writing were just about like people not talking about Black Lives Matter, but making it a point to like still publish other things when people were talking about what was happening with the movement, and how not talking about it wasn't just like something that was like, people were very much like, oh, it's okay not to talk about it, but it's like, you know, this is happening, you have a platform, you should speak up, and people not understanding why you would feel that way. I think on the other side of it too is doing the work of like a lot of people not understanding that all music comes from Black music, and having to give a history lesson when people are like, look at all these young Black rock artists that are up and coming, and you're like, okay, I see what you're doing. You're highlighting these artists. Okay, cool. Let's just circle back to like the beginning of time. Let's just go back to gospel, and then we can meet you at like, so I've got to write like 3 more paragraphs before I get to the point of my article, because people don't know, or they haven't done the homework, or they've just made an assumption. So I do think there's a part of me, like Clarissa said, that struggles with it, because on one hand, you really do want to tell this story so that people know moving forward. But on the other side of it, you feel like, why do I have to do this? Why am I doing this like labored work of explaining to you something that should be known?
I think the time during the George Floyd protests is probably the hardest in my career. Editors reaching out to me saying they want me to look over articles so their white audience can understand what's going on. I'm fighting with editors so we don't run the clip of George Floyd getting murdered on camera. Why can't we put that in the video, Candace? Why do you think? Right? Like having to explain things like that to these places that have the resources, that have the money to kind of find out for themselves, really kind of tested my limits, I think personally as a journalist. Like I could not believe it. And it kind of just goes to show you how much work there needs to be done in journalism and media overall when it comes to representation for Black people.
It's extremely hard, you know, like I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never reported to, I've been doing it full time, luckily. I've never had a Black editor, and that's the unlucky part. You know, I've been at Legacy Media, I've never had a Black editor. Me creating A Beautiful Resistance is my first time even having a whole Black cohort. And the things that are asked of us is taxing, because you're doing the job that you were hired for, plus 2 other jobs. You're doing like DEI work, you're teaching people, you have to do this explain thing that you shouldn't have to do. I'll never forget one time this editor asking me to explain a Living Single reference. And I looked at her and said, you would never ask me to explain what Friends was. And I said, just so you know, Friends stole its entire concept from Living Single. So if you want me to explain it, then the explainer sentence is going to be the hit 90s show led by Queen Latifah, in which Friends stole its entire framework. Like that will be your explainer sentence. Or having another editor say to me, it seems like you write about people you know, and me having to say, I live in a city that's predominantly white and my peer group is this big. I'm not writing about my friends. I am writing about people who also are in the art circle that I run in. And you would never say that to the white critics who write about the white artists at the bar they hang out at. But because my community is so much smaller, you're imposing implied biases that just aren't there. And it can be a very lonely thing, because when you are covering your community, particularly if you're covering it locally, it's almost like you are asked to separate yourself in a way that is just not demanded of others. I'm just so glad we're able to talk about this. And because we have talked about the backlash and these things that we endure, Philip Lewis has this great question that I was going to get to later, but it makes sense to get to it now. I'm so glad that they raised it. How do you feel like the era we're in, you talked about being doxxed and being dragged, and I think a lot of people's fear is just getting canceled by Black Twitter. How has it affected criticism? Like, I think about Greg Tate and Dream Hampton and Danielle, all of these great people, and they wrote critical pieces. And one of you, I can't remember who, literally said, sometimes it feels like these are PR pieces. How do you feel like this, where we're at on social media and where we're at as a community has shifted what criticism looks like?
Yeah, I think it was Candace was talking about how a lot of pieces end up feeling like PR pieces. I have a very interesting relationship with social media, because social media is how I found out about freelance opportunities and ultimately started working with editors. And a lot of, the times when I wasn't like living in New York, or I didn't have a music journalism community yet in person. But at the same time, I feel like because everyone is so online and so on Twitter, an article comes out and people don't even read the actual article. They'll read the headline, or they'll read just highlights from the article that somebody took a picture of and put on Twitter or put on Instagram. And because of that, and because everyone can have access to that and comment on it, it doesn't leave room for people to actually just read something and then have an opinion about it, or even just comment on the article, as opposed to going to social media and starting like a witch hunt. And I think it does make you feel like you're not safe to write what you really think, because it's not as simple as like somebody might not like it. Like, this is true harassment. This is people looking you up and trying to find out where you live and making death threats. So anybody being put up against that, that's going to make you pause before writing a certain thing or telling the truth about how you really feel, which, if we continue to move in that direction, and even with artists saying how they feel about criticism and not agreeing with it, or deciding that they don't want to be interviewed and sharing that on Twitter as well, I think a lot of it's kind of moving us away from the heart of what music criticism used to be.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add, and I put a link in the chat. There was a piece by Allegra Hobbs, who used to be at Study Hall, about the journalist as an influencer. And I think that, I feel like that piece spoke to that shift that's happened in the last 3 or 4 years, from writer to journalist to PR. And I think it has something to do with power. I think it's much easier to be somebody who writes less critical pieces and to be liked and to have access to power and celebrity than it is to be critical, especially of like Black artists. I'm thinking of one of my favorite writers, Najma Sharif, wrote a critical piece about Ivy Park and the labor issues there, and was harassed by the Beehive for it. So I think it's one, you know, identity is commodity now. So a lot of journalists are like, I could get harassed, or I could just turn to PR work and do copy. And I too have looked, but I think for myself, I always want to be a little uncomfortable being close to power. I think just as an abolitionist and as an organizer, even when I do like celebrity profiles, I don't want to be too buddy-buddy. You know, I want to be able to tell the truth about the work. And I think with social media, especially for young folks, like it's just easier to be the voice that's in agreement and have that access than to be on the other side of it. So that's, again, why I try to tell folks to focus on the work, because you look to many other places and it's easy to get lost.
I agree with Erica and Clarissa about people either not doing it at all or just taking kind of the easier route of just putting these celebrities and these businesses in such a glowing light because they don't want to have backlash, or these institutions who run pieces that are asinine compared to the political climate we're in right now. It's just interesting to see what makes the news, what's considered a feature, what's considered a think piece. I think it's important to be aware of it, to read what's going on, to see what other people are writing, but I think it's also important, like Clarissa said, to stick to the work and interrogate things honestly.
That part, interrogate them honestly. Like when I'm writing about a subject, I'm often writing about why it exists or why it doesn't need to exist, or, you know, it's critically thinking, period, is a lost mode. It's a lost mindset. And if we had people who are more willing to interrogate things, more willing to go deeper, we'd have a lot less misinformation. And that's like just outside of talking about opining, like just actual critically thinking. I also just, you can't say B without getting stung. It's just like
Can I add?
Yes.
Sorry, I was just want to add one more thing. I think the other side is that celebrities have a really big mistrust in media for very fair reasons.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the Kehlani interview clip that I saw. Like a lot of media, specifically like women and queer folks, have been really violent towards them in their work. Like that interview was uncomfortable to watch because it was a violation. And I get why a lot of artists don't trust media. So I think that is also why a lot of celebrities are like, I don't want to be interviewed. I just want to write my own piece, because the media has had such a contentious energy with Black and brown queer artists. So it's twofold. We're not getting access because people aren't hiring us. And also a lot of Black women artists are like, I'm getting asked about my sex life. Therefore, I don't want to talk to anybody. So it's a two-way street, definitely.
Yeah, and I think some of that, there's also a culture of that, especially when we're talking about radio interviews in a very certain type of media, a very specific type of media. There are these very sexist, anti-queer attitudes that just permeate everything. And I've seen it happen to journalists as well. Like if you are a journalist in these space, there's a reaction to you that can be hypersexual, that can be violent. I mean, so much of the conversation, the negative conversation towards me. And sometimes Candace will check on me because she sees the comments under my piece, and I'll tell her, girl, I don't even see those because they have my email, they have my phone number. So it's like I'm dealing with, you know, a whole nother different level of ugly things that are coming my way. And so much of it is steeped in my identity and not the work. But you said something really important, Clarissa, about how the artists are treated. And I'm thinking about Viola Davis because I don't really think Viola Davis was even speaking to criticism. She was speaking to what was happening online, which was aggressive and rude and nasty. Whether you like the performance or not, it got so insane. And to be frank, it also comes from a desire for people to want to make Michelle Obama this perfect. Her eyebrows were that sharp, and she does talk that way. That's just a true thing. It doesn't mean you have to like the performance. It's just that also is an accurate thing. It's not a inaccurate thing. It doesn't make her any less gorgeous. It doesn't make her any less loved. It's just, that's a true thing. But when we don't like a thing culturally, especially in social media, it becomes like, let's drag someone for 24 hours. Let's abuse them for 48 hours. I think a lot about Lena Waithe. You know, I am wholly disinterested in Little Marvin's Them. I think it should be critiqued for as many times as people want to critique it. But one, no one talked about Little Marvin. They just sat on the internet for 2 weeks and abused Lena Waithe in a way that was deeply sexist and anti-Black from within our own community. And there's a fine line in which I feel like we get lumped into these categories, we as media get lumped into this troll category when we're not part of it. And can you talk about sort of like just how a culture, not our actual craft of writing, but a culture of criticism and feedback that is rooted in like this, I hate what you're doing, has led to kind of a very toxic relationship between audience and artist?
The more marginalized you are, the harsher the criticism becomes. And then because media is not diverse at all, I'm speaking for all Black people when I write something. That means we need more Black voices in these spaces, because I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I can't represent every Black person in America, right? But you see this one person writing about a Black thing, usually for a white publication, you're speaking for all Black people. That happens to me a lot. It happened, I think the worst example of it was Beyonce, but even now when I do opinion pieces at the Root, like, it's under the title opinion, it's my opinion. And I think the same thing with Lena Waithe, right? Like, your identity becomes weaponized because that's the easiest way to hurt you. You're not, a white woman must have did this film, a white woman must have approved this, no Black people would like it. And I'm like, she doesn't speak for all Black people. She's just one Black woman director. Like, she wanted to do them, like, you didn't like it, cool, turn it off. But to question her Blackness because you don't like something she did is just vile. And that's probably the worst criticism I've ever gotten in my career, is from Black people. Calling me a coon, saying you're a white woman, you're not Black, because we don't like what you think. So hurtful. And I sadly don't see it getting better, honestly. I think it's gonna get worse the more we kind of continue with just being on social media as much as we are.
Well, yeah, and I think about what it means to have, Elon saying, I want Trump back. I'm going to bring back all this stuff. And, getting rid of Trump did not get rid of my hate mail at all, or my hate tweets, or any of the ways in which I'm trolled. But I do think having someone who's openly supporting that culture is just going to make things worse. And then us having this shade and fraud kind of like delight in it all, like this delight in the dragging, also compounds the nastiness.
Mm-hmm. I put an article in the chat, but my best friend, Christine Singleton, who I think is watching this, says this phrase of, I never want to be a villain to Black women. And that has really been critical to how I understand the internet. I think also just once you get dragged, you become very aware of your relationship to other people, become very aware of how they're cracking jokes about somebody today, but last week it was you, and last week it could be them. So I say that to say I put the article in the chat about the blurriness because social media personalities are being seen as real sources of news. I'm even thinking about the Young Thug and Gunna RICO charges. People are posting things about that case that are not sourced from accounts that are not real. And they are taking it as fact, even as there are Black journalists in Atlanta, like myself and other writers have been like, is this real? Because we can't tell the difference sometimes. But the lines have become so blurry that, you know, what can happen at a radio station with somebody who's not a journalist, who doesn't have the background or the training to have those conversations, gets turned into, for management of artists and their teams, we're not coming back to radio. We're not coming back to this publication because this happened, or y'all wrote this. So it is a lot of like relationship management. But I think that is why, again, I tell young folks, like, really keep your boundaries about if you're interviewing somebody, if you're the subject, because people can start expecting things from you when you get really close because those lines are so blurry. Yeah, it's a scary thing to do. And also, I think that's why I really try to not join in when those moments happen. Because I remember when everybody was eating me up. I remember how isolating and painful it was. And yeah, I never want to put that pain out into the world for somebody else.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's easy to pile on, especially on Twitter. And especially when you think it's just like something light. Because I remember when Candace's piece with Beyonce was going around, there were people that were commenting on like the list that didn't know what was really going on behind the scenes and didn't know that there were people making actual threats and actual attacks as well. So it does make you look and see, like, you might think that this is just a comment or you're just retweeting something, but in reality, like, when you allow like the mob to be a part of anything, we don't really have many examples of a mob taking the opportunity to uplift someone or to bring about positive change. It's usually just like brings out this really ugly side of people. But I also agree with what everybody's saying, just as far as like it does feel more insidious and darker when it comes to Black women. Like, even if people are not writing about that person's particular race or like that they're a woman, like the comments that about Megan's case that were coming up, or like, you would never see that with if we're talking about the exact same situation occurred with with something happened to Britney Spears that was similar to that, could you imagine what the coverage would be like? We would never go down this path. And for people not to see why that's happening and to feel like you have to point to it and go, okay, like, look at this and why is it different? I think the internet just makes it harder, especially when it's coming from people that, you know, claim to be fans of this music or claim to be part of this community.
There's Joanna Baker has a really good question about institutions and what in our careers has helped nurture our strength and what has kind of been a hurdle for us when we're working with these institutions. And I love that question because it does look at it takes into account what we're dealing with as writers, as journalists. Like, we are in a framework that in a system that we are dealing with institutional sexism and racism and various things. So how has working in this field kind of helped you or hurt you?
I think one of the biggest things for me when I became more intentional about covering Black topics was asking to interview Black artists. It makes a huge difference in the interview. You can tell that they feel comfortable. It doesn't always, I saw that Kehlani interview too, and it kind of went left real quick. But usually I wouldn't ask about someone's sexuality like that. But I feel like, you know, when you have a Black person, especially when I was doing, you know, interviews during the George Floyd protests, like, I could talk to other Black musicians about it because they're Black too. Like, the colorism, the racial profiling being called around stores, they don't have to explain that to me because I understand it. You talk about being a dark-skinned Black woman in a pop space and the expectations placed on you. I understand what you're talking about because I experience the same thing, right? So I feel like one of the biggest joys in the field is just being able to connect with with Black artists about their craft and having that kinship already before we talk.
Yeah, I can go quickly. I think the things that have been a huge benefit is building community with other Black women journalists. I do not know where I would be without Black women in my life, and Black women who have just nurtured my dreams and told me that the thing I care about matters. Yeah, Candace is a part of that group of folks where like Candace is writing something and I'm like, okay, that means that like somewhere in the ether this exists, and that feels important. Also Black women, Black editors being honest with me when something's just bad, I feel like it's been really an important gut check. David Dennis, who's a book that's out this week called The Movement Made Us, was my journalism professor. And I remember my first print piece, he was like, it was good. It needs to be edited, but it was good. And I was like, you're not wrong. He was not wrong at all. And I love that because I really do care about the craft. So having good editors is important. And I think the thing that has been a hindrance has been there's just a generational shift in journalism happening. And I remember I was pitching a story about the housing crisis at Spelman. I pitched it to a Black male editor. And a lot of the sources were Twitter. A lot of the sources were just students online being like, look, I'm houseless, and just trying to advocate for themselves. And I remember the editor basically telling me that this wasn't a real story, and that, you know, basically that HBCU students are being dramatic. And, you know, all my Scorpio placements said, don't you worry, I'm gonna go get this pitch somewhere else. And I did. And, you know, I'm seeing the shift in how legacy and older journalists are very much like, if it is a hindrance to the institutions that we built and created, then I don't want criticism about it. I don't want stories about it. And for me, having been somebody who was in these institutions and barely survived them, and see the students that are also barely surviving them, I feel like it's my job to make sure folks know that like students at Spelman and Morehouse and Clark are living in hotels. I think that matters. So ruffling up that generation of journalists and Black folks is difficult, but I'm also like, you know, I don't think I'd be here if I was supposed to be quiet, so.
I think that my career so far has benefited a lot from women in general, just having their guidance and knowing when to ask questions that you might not want the answer to, and knowing when, you know, it's time to leave a certain position, and also just being around people that are more candid about how much they're making, what their experience is like, because I think just being a woman in journalism in general, but also being a Black woman, there can be so many discrepancies in what's happening with you and what's happening with the person sitting right next to you that's doing the same job. So having like the confidence to ask those questions and have uncomfortable conversations. I feel like this question is interesting though, because so much of like the opportunities that I've gotten have been from, you know, people, you know, reaching out and deciding like, okay, you might not have that much experience, but we're going to give you a chance, an opportunity. A lot of editors that don't have my point of view as a Black woman, but we're like, okay, we're going to let you talk about this because we're going to pass the mic instead of trying to explain this, which I genuinely appreciate. But like we talked about earlier, at the same time, when somebody who doesn't know your experience hands you the mic, but then they're the editor, so they have to like take the mic back, the story, you kind of have to do that extra work as well. So I feel like in my career, everything has been a great opportunity to kind of teach me how to be a better journalist, but that has never come without that added experience of having to like not only represent myself, but represent a whole group of people every time I'm in a conversation, every time I'm in a room, every time I'm talking about a topic, or even having that question that a lot of white journalists never have to ask of like, is this happening right now because this person is genuinely questioning my work? Or is this happening because I'm Black? Like, I think about the fact that I have to question that all the time. That's added time in my day. That's anxiety that somebody else isn't experiencing. So I'm grateful for every opportunity I have, but it's always going to come with that added, that added experience just because of who I am.
There's a cost. I grew up in legacy media. I started right out of college at 21. And on the outside, people think, oh my God, this is amazing. You became a columnist when you were just 28 years old. And that is amazing that, 7 years into my career, I became a columnist. But at what cost? I was covering music and fashion and food and entertainment at 21. And although I'm so grateful that someone took a chance on me, a white music critic, he actually advocated for me to get my job. He said he needed my help. And they did a lot to get me hired, but they also hired me. I was severely underpaid and I had no idea. And because I was so severely underpaid, even when I became a columnist, I was severely underpaid. When I found out what all my peers were making, who were writing less than me and making over six figures when I was not making anywhere near that. I've been hurt by this industry in ways that I'm still healing from. Like I had to go to therapy for, because I never had a situation where an institution didn't want me to write critical things, because that always, even if it was negative feedback, people were reading. So they never tried to silence me, but they also did nothing to protect me when I was being threatened and when I was being hurt and violated. They did nothing to protect me. And I think about that a lot because this industry has given me so much, and I love journalism, but I often think about the cost and the toll. And it's something I wrestle with all the time. And that leads up to a question I was going to ask that one of our wonderful audience members also asked, which is, how do you protect your mental health? How are you taking care of yourself? What is it you do to fill your cups?
Going back to what Clarissa said earlier, sometimes I just get off the internet. It seems like such a simple thing, but you don't even realize because it's on your phone. It's where you work at. It's everywhere. But really taking a prolonged break and remembering that you are a person outside of your job, which is another thing that I have to constantly remind myself of because I'm so tied to what I do and I love it so much. I think has to happen. There's a lot of meditating and silencing my mind involved because it gets really loud when you're not only trying to do your job, but you're having all this extra noise going on around you. And then you're having to deal with a lot of the topics we talked about today that some journalists don't have to deal with. So I think really getting away from it, shutting off your computer and just remembering that like who you are outside of this is more important than what you do day to day.
Yeah. I've been in therapy for a good 3-4 years because of how intense the harassment I've dealt with various times has been. So I'm gonna stay in therapy. I know that for certain. I think also just for my mental health, I'm good. My friends will tell you, I'll send a voice note. I will send a thought in the group chat just because I know the internet is not always the place where I want to delve that out because, as I've said, like I'm used to the internet being a place where I can just talk into the void. And because of visibility, I'm not always talking into the void and people are responding and interacting and telling me their opinion, even though I didn't ask. So talking to my friends and us having conversation just feels better. And, I can complain about the internet and get it off my chest and they can complain and we can keep going on with our lives. And I pour into myself by reading and getting off the internet, especially when things feel difficult. I try to read Toni Morrison or Toni K. Bambara, June Jordan. I always just go back to the Black women who have shaped my political thought and my organizing work and my writing work because there's nothing new under the sun, and they probably have something that can help me get through this moment. So that's always what I turn to. Yeah, because it's the thing that always fills me up.
I think, time with friends, taking a break from the internet helps. During COVID, I had a lot of depression that I didn't know how to deal with. I started therapy, and it led me to leave Boston after living there for 14 years, right? So I moved to Chicago last year, and like that big life changed. That big life change was really good for my mental health. I feel like I'm just in a better place mentally. It was hard living here and making new friends and starting over, but I have a better quality of life. I have a new environment that invigorates me. So I think smaller things with bigger things has really helped me during all of this.
Yeah, I think for me, it's therapy, it's prayer, it's meditation. It's always James Baldwin and Toni Morrison. It's also the mighty power of no. I have gotten very comfortable with saying, no, I don't need to be on Twitter. I don't have to post. I don't have to be that active. No, everything I post on Instagram doesn't need to be rooted in the news. I can just go on there, post a pretty picture and have fun and leave. No, I don't have to answer every email. I am not a product to be consumed. It's that very empowering myself in that no, in the beauty of it. I end every conversation with the beauty. So I absolutely want to end this lovely sisterhood with each of you sharing what makes your work a beautiful resistance. And I'm gonna add a little thing. What makes your work a beautiful resistance? And Candace, if you could give a little love note to Clarissa, and Clarissa, if you could get a love note to Erica, and Erica, you can give one to Candace, and then we can say goodnight.
You don't get one?
Nah, I don't need one.
Okay,
you guys are my love note. You guys are my love note.
I think what makes my work a beautiful resistance is the fact that I'm not afraid to be who I am. The authenticity, the ability to keep going and to relish in that. It kind of bleeds into my love note for Clarissa. I read her work for a long time, and I interviewed her for an article I wrote last year. And I talked to her on the phone, and her spirit was just so beautiful. She was so excited to talk to me about Black womanhood, about being on the margins, about her experience. And she was still full of joy. As a dark-skinned Black woman, it took me a long time to love myself. And I look at Clarissa and I see that love in her. So that's my love note to you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I remember that. I remember like sitting on my porch and being like, I could talk about Beyonce for hours. Like, don't worry about it. I feel like my work is a beautiful resistance because, at my core, I'm really just a nerdy Black girl. Like, I really genuinely still feel like a very curious 15-year-old who's just on the internet, on Tumblr, just really hype about one very specific thing. So even like the Saucy Santana pieces or, the very fancy, flashy things, like at my core, I'm really like rereading Toni Morrison so I can pull a quote from it so I can, get into the nitty gritty of it. And that feels the thing that keeps me really centered in the things I do. My love note to Erica is that it is very hard to find Black women that write about rock. Very difficult. And Erica's work has kept my faith really clear about the fact that it matters and it exists. I remember when I wrote the piece about Black people loving Paramore, I had a real big conflict with Nylon Magazine about it. And following Erica's career has just reminded me that like I'm not limited to hip hop and R&B. Danielle Smith's work reminds me of that too, that pop is Black folks are everywhere. We've always been everywhere. So I'm really grateful for that. And anytime folks ask me, I'm always like, especially about the Paramore piece, I'm always like, great, know you love it. Erica is the person you need to go to. So grateful to know that you exist in the world.
Thank you so much. I'm receiving that. That means so much. And I always follow and love your work as well. So I really appreciate that. So I think what makes my work a beautiful resistance, I'm a girl from South Carolina, Baptist preacher's daughter. I love music. I love music like church. I love it on a religious level. I love reading about things. Like always is going to come back to like little girl version of me, and to wake up and to be able to tap into that thing that I love and enjoy, even when it gets hard, even when it gets dark. I feel like that to me, because it wasn't easy to get here. And I'm sure that all of you can agree, like there were so many times it would have been easier to just quit and just be like, this isn't worth it. I don't want to do this. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want people talking to me this way. So I think being able to be led by joy instead of being kind of bogged down by that darker side that kind of takes you over, I think that's what makes it a beautiful resistance. Ooh, and Candace, I'm going to try to talk about Candace without crying. I mean, in life, I have had so many random things come up, especially during the pandemic when we would have like long phone calls and FaceTimes about being music journalists, about being Black women in this industry. And not only does Candace have the tendency to uplift others, she knows how to be honest and to talk you down when like you're going the wrong way. We've had conversations where she's like, you need to calm down, like you're good, like you just need to take a break, you're good. And I think it takes a really honest and genuine and person of integrity to not only like fan your flames, but tell you when you need to like put them out. I mean, in life, it's good to have somebody that really is honest and can really be a good friend. And Candace is all of those things. And that's why her writing is just so beautiful as well. So that's my love letter.
Thank you. I'm gonna do one real quick for Jeneé. We got 3 minutes. Okay, Jeneé, you went into the Boston Globe. That's when I first met you, and you took that shit by storm. You brought Black people with you in those doors. You continue to bring them with you with a beautiful resistance. You do all this work with grace. A lot of people do a lot of weird shit for clout on the gram, and you hold your head high and do this remarkable work with such dignity that you inspire me so much because of it. And I always watch your stories. I always comment. I always, the hairstyle looking fresh, articles looking fresh. You've inspired me so much as a Black woman. I aspire to be like you. Whenever I have the opportunity to have these spaces, I always bring you in because you're brilliant. And I'm so grateful that you're in my life. Okay, I'm done.
Do not make me cry. Thank you, Candace. I'm so truly blessed to have you as a little sister. And Erica, as someone who is still regretting not writing about the new Batman through the lens of Nirvana and how much I love Nirvana. I'm also very happy that you exist. I'm happy all three of you exist. I just want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. I'm going to throw this back to the lovely, lovely, lovely Susan, who's going to actually close us out.
Well, my heart is singing. I am humbled by your humanity, your joy, your resistance, your beautiful resistance, your fierceness, your joy. No words. So thank you all so very much for everything that you do to lift up and honor Black womanhood, artistry, joy. It's been just an honor to host you at Fort Hall Forum. You are part of the 115-year storied history of the Forum. And I hope to welcome you back in the not too distant future. Candace, let's talk soon. I love hearing
more. We'll do more.
Let's do more of this. So thank you. Thank you so much. What a pleasure it's been. We'll see you soon. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us for this really terrific conversation. Be safe, be well. Thank you. Good night.